This is the Guns Magazine podcast, episode number 45. Hi there, and welcome to the Guns Magazine podcast. I'm your host and the editor of Guns Magazine, Brent Wheat. Thanks for joining us as we talk to the interesting people who make up the world of shooting, hunting, and the firearms industry. But before we get started, let's talk about our sponsor, Kimber Firearms. Kimber was founded with the singular purpose of making every firearm the best it can possibly be, with a fit and finish that only practiced hands can achieve and appreciate. Whether you carry a Kimber for personal protection, hunting, or competition, know that their promise of quality without compromise is how they measure success. To learn more about Kimber Firearms, visit kimberamerica.com. Today, I'm chatting with Steve Tehrani, a noted trainer, author, speaker, and expert in many different areas of personal protection. Steve's resume sounds like a dust jacket blurb, and I'm just hitting the high points here. He's a former CIA full-time employee and protective services subject matter expert, and you might note he served on Donald Trump's pre-election protection detail. Steve is a certified federal military and law enforcement trainer who provides contract training services for the U.S. Naval Special Operations Command, Department of Defense, Department of Justice, and countless other federal, state, local, and non-governmental agencies. He's also been a staff instructor at Gunsight Academy for over 20 years and is the lead instructor for the National Rifle Association's Non-Ballistic Weapons Training Program. There's so much more, but as a final note, I'd like to point out that I think Steve's a pretty humble guy who has no reason to be humble. Now here's my chat with trainer and protective agent extraordinaire, Steve Tehrani. Well, Steve, thanks for joining us here on the Guns Magazine podcast. I've known you a long time, and you're well known in the industry. But for folks that may not be familiar with Steve Tehrani, kind of give us the quick overview of who you are and why you're important to their safety.
Well, Brent actually found me under a freeway holding a cardboard sign that says, "We'll talk for food." So that's where I'm here. But in my other life, when I'm not holding a cardboard sign, is in the world of defensive tactics and firearms training. I have an extensive defensive tactics background, and for work, I come from the federal government, both as a contractor and an employee in the defense intelligence community, and ended up in protective programs and work to this day in executive protection.
Well, and that's a very brief overview. You've been an instructor at Gunsight over 2 decades. You have trained all across the world. As you said, you've done executive protection, dignitary protection, and you worked for the that one organization that goes by 3 letters that you're actually on the side you can say you worked for them.
Yes, 3 letters and a vowel. Yes.
You know, in such a varied career as you've had, we were talking that everybody in this business talks about having a toolbox, and you need to put tools in your toolbox. And I got to say, you're probably the guy that's got the biggest toolbox in the industry. You're a renowned martial arts expert. You're a shooting expert. You're a competitor. What's the phrase you use to describe what you teach?
I like to look at it in terms of range or distance, and that would be from 200 yards to bad breath range.
Well, let's start back with the edged weapon side of it, because a lot of folks know you as the karambit expert. It's an edged weapon, and I got to say, I this may be a little hyperbolic, but when I watch you demonstrate the karambit, I call it the ballet of death, because it's so beautiful and precise, but yet when it's over, you're thinking, oh my Lord, he just cut that man into 164 pieces. But give me a brief overview of how you got involved in the karambit and what it is about it that really clicks with you.
Well, it's, like I said, it's just another tool in the toolkit, you know, a gun, a knife, a baseball bat, whatever you need to solve the tactical problem. That particular piece of kit, I was first introduced to it through one of my instructors that I trained under for many years, and I also worked jobs which took me in different places in the world, and one of the places I trained and studied was in Indonesia, and that's where I got the bulk of my training was from my Indonesian teachers that are absolute world-renowned experts in that area.
And what's the origination of the karambit? Because there's nothing like that in Western culture.
Well, basically, it's a curved blade, and we in our Western culture we are accustomed to straight edge. It's just a different shape, and also it comes from, as do our daggers and folding knives, came from Western European swords that were shortened down.
Yeah.
The same thing. Those blades came from large-scale battlefield models called the Klurit, K-L-U-R-I-T, and they were scaled down into what we now know as the karambit, which is a pocket size or neck carry version of the curved blade.
Well, let's change tacks a little bit. One of, I think, the most fascinating things you've done is the whole dignitary protection, executive protection, close protection. There's a lot of different names for it. You've done it both in the government and private sector, and you still continue to do it.
Yes, sir.
And that has a lot of relevance to folks today, because a lot of folks that maybe didn't even worry about their personal safety before are really starting to reconsider that.
Let me ask a simple question. Do we live in a safer community now than it was 10 years ago?
I think we know the answer to that one.
So in my opinion, the need for solutions to potential problems is greater.
Right.
And so, the supply for that demand, in my opinion, is training. Mm-hmm. And there's two types of people, I believe, that, some people don't care at all. You have those people who care, those people who don't care, those people who don't know, or all three: don't know, don't care, don't want to know, But if you are one of those folks that does care, is aware, and knows that this stuff's going on, what are some options that are available to you to secure or be better prepared for protection of yourself and your family?
Yeah.
And that's where these tools come in. And part of those tools is what I call your most powerful weapon, which happens to be in my latest book. And cheap plug here, but I've got a tremendous amount of information in there about using your most powerful weapon, in that your brain box does not need a license. You don't have to get it registered with the government. It doesn't require batteries, and it works 24/7.
Well, in most folks.
It is the most readily available tool that we have on our available to us. So if it's the case that you can solve the tactical problem using your most powerful weapon, which one of us would not rather have that option?
Exactly.
Because a lot of guys, I had a student, one of my gun classes, he was a very good shooter, very experienced, and he was in a real world altercation where he was in a situation against a wall, perfectly good shoot. It was a robbery, and he was fully justified, and he had his weapon inside the waistband. He was highly trained. He could have solved that problem using a gun, using that tool to solve the problem. However, as the scenario unfolded, he thought to himself, okay, I am living on the West Coast, and here the price tag, even if it is a good shoot, is very expensive, after attorney's fees, and you may be criminally cleared, but
that's even questionable nowadays.
Yes. And now you got to deal with the civil piece. So in his mind, he said it all seemed like an hour, but it was a matter of seconds.
Yeah.
He made the decision to not go to guns and solve the problem utilizing his most powerful weapon. Mm-hmm. And he said at the end of it, he was so happy that he made that decision, that it came to better outcome, and he ended up walking away and talked his way out of it, and problem solved. So even though he had that tool, didn't need to go to it.
Well, while we're talking about books, you've got another book called Prevents.
Yes.
And explain a little bit what that is, because I thought that was such a great word. It's a great title because it encapsulates all this that you're talking about.
Yes, prevents, or it's short for preventative defense or preventive defense. So prevents is just, it's kind of an umbrella term about these tools that we're talking about, increasing your situational awareness, applying your situational awareness, utilizing your environment to your advantage, etc. So these are all the soft skill tools that we're talking about. So I just want to differentiate between hard skills and soft skills. Hard skills is, defensive driving, defensive shooting, hand-to-hand, martial arts, Brazilian jiu-jitsu.
The cool stuff everybody wants to talk about.
Exactly. But, that takes a time commitment, a tremendous time commitment. Yeah. For example, you want to get good at rolling around on the ground, that's 6 hours a week minimum. Mm-hmm. You want to do a perfectly well-placed, combat effective round placement headshot at sub 1.5 from inside the waistband. That's a commitment.
Yep.
We're talking minimum 3 to 4 days a week on the range. And some people will make that commitment and do have that, have made that time and effort commitment. However, the majority of us who, remember, we have life. We have these things called jobs and families and all this other
mortgages
stuff.
and all that stuff.
All that. We have to work it all in and find that operational balance that fits your lifestyle and fits your personal profile. And to be able to solve the problem and to offer the opportunity to use a tool that can solve that problem using your most powerful weapon, why wouldn't you take that option?
Exactly. And the term you use, soft skills, as an industry, as a gun publishing industry, we tend to overlook that because the other stuff is cool. I've done driving courses and shooting and et cetera, and that's the fun, flashy stuff. And we also get wrapped around the equipment. If I get this better gun, this better bullet, et cetera, et cetera. And,
if I get this trigger job and I can do this, and I put this sight on and blah, blah, blah. Yeah.
And experienced shooters, they've seen the situation where the guy shows up with the really expensive gun and can't shoot at all. So, it's endemic in our culture of we try to focus on the stuff and the flashy stuff. But what you're talking about, again, my experience as a cop is that's going to get you out of the vast majority of situations. And if we're all being honest, especially in today's milieu society, you really want to be able to walk away from something instead of fighting your way out of something. So soft skills is something that as I say, it may not be as sexy as some of this other stuff, but it's probably actually in a way in its place more important.
Well, people always ask me about, I trained for this and I trained for that, and I'm a training guy. So, there's two types of people in the world. Those who are prepared, meaning those who are trained, and those who aren't, which means those who aren't trained. And the soft skills versus the hard skills thing, my first question would be, when's the last time you were in a drag down, knockout, face in the dirt fight?
Yeah.
Was that yesterday? Last week? Some people it was this afternoon, right?
Well, I try to stay out of that bar, but...
Exactly. But you probably use your soft skills more, like you said, 90-something% of the time. In the world of executive protection, we are 100% soft skills. In fact, I got to share a story from my former employer. We were doing a pre-deployment training where we were briefed on, we're going to this country, this is going to happen, we're going to do this. And one of the things that this guy, and he was a very experienced executive protection expert, 30-something years on, and he said to us, if you boys go to guns, you failed.
Yeah.
And I never forgot that because I didn't understand it at the time, but as time went on, I got more familiar with the job. I realized, if you can't solve the problem, then you failed at your soft skills and you're left with no other choice but to rely on your hard skills.
It's funny, in that situation, if you guys had gone to guns, that literally would be an international incident.
It would be.
Big time.
Yeah, so that's why they stress not only in our training, but in our practical application. And I took that, far beyond, outside my work in the private world as well, with your family and with your friends. It's a relaxed condition, but you're on alert to because you're trained and you have the tools. And for example, one of our guys, take a typical Secret Service guy, for example. He could walk into a room and see 27 different things that would get his attention, whereas a person who doesn't have that training wouldn't see one.
Yeah.
Because he's alerted to, hey, this is a potential threat. That could be something that's emerging or developing, and you wouldn't know that unless you had the training. And here's the other thing about soft skills is, if you have no other choice but to go to hard skills, that means you're going to hands or guns or something like that.
Yeah.
That means your scale of injury is going to be raised. You're going to get hurt.
Exactly.
You're lucky if you walk away without a scratch. In fact, odds are against you. They're not very likely you're going to walk away without a scratch. Soft skills, guaranteed you're walking away without a scratch.
And, that's something, again, I think that we tend to overlook is, you got to shoot and get those shots on target, but realize, and folks do, but a lot of folks don't really accept this deep in their heart, that there's probably going to be rounds coming at you or a guy with a machete or whatever. And it's a bloody, ugly business. And I always remember, and I've told the story many, many times, that I took some knife skills from you, and your first statement was, the first rule of a knife fight is don't be in a knife fight.
Right. Don't put yourself in that
just
situation.
Ugly.
Yeah, don't put yourself in that situation in the first place. Things start to look ugly. I mean, you can feel it, see it, hear it, smell it.
Yep.
Okay, granted, if you did not hear it, see it, hear it, smell it coming, whatever, then you don't have a choice. But if if your wits are about you and you do see something developing, you can walk away from it.
Yeah.
The greatest battles are won without even stepping on the battlefield, and that's the key on that.
And let's talk about current affairs a little bit. I get this question almost daily, and people talking to me. What should I do if I'm driving down the street and I see this group of nonviolent social justice protesters who are lighting stuff on fire and dragging people out of the cars and beating them? Steve, what would you tell somebody in that situation?
Well, like we were talking about before, if you see it, then that gives you the opportunity to not be there. So avoidance is your number one defensive tactic. It's a soft skill. Your scale of injury is 0. You do not have to engage the threat. It doesn't put you in a situation where you must go from a soft skill to a hard skill. The advantages are tremendous to stay left of bang.
Yeah. And I'm currently reading that book. I know it's been out for a while, but somebody bought it for me, and I'm reading it. And fantastic book. Yeah. And I think sometimes, and I'm not casting dispersion on the younger gents in the audience, but obviously I'm a little more closer to the seasoned citizen end of the range. But sometimes we let our machismo get in the way. How many times when we were all younger, we got into a situation that had we just decided to walk away rather than push the matter, and that's kind of the same kind of thing, is keeping yourself under control.
Yeah. There's one of the things I've found in shooting, I've had to go through every course imaginable to, for get my credentials, et cetera. But I've learned this, is that an orangutan can pull a trigger. And sometimes they do.
You've seen me shoot. I know.
and you come to realize, as you develop your skills over the years, over the decades, you come to realize that there is trigger control, there's muzzle control, et cetera, but the number one thing you need to learn to control to be a really, really good shooter is what's between the earmuffs.
Yeah.
That is the most difficult of them all, because the rest of it's mechanical. What's between the earmuffs, that's not mechanical. And that's what takes the most dedication.
And the whole stress inoculation concept, not only do you have to practice the right skills the right way, but you have to get yourself stressed out too, because if folks have never been, and truly probably the majority of folks have never really been in a dangerous knockdown situation, and the first time you do, it's not fight or flight, it's fight, flight, or freeze. And actually, we see the freeze more than anything.
Yeah, and it really is a matter. There's a section in, again, not plugging my book, but there's an entire
conveniently
an entire chapter. Thank you, by the way, for there's an entire chapter on controlling fear.
Yeah,
and it's the last chapter in the book because it ties it all together. And there are ways to control fear proactively and also actively. And what you're talking about, Brent, is the proactive measures, and what those are, which is my whole premise for both of those books, is that there are things you can do to prepare yourself, like you said about inoculating your mind. The human mind can be inoculated it turns out to be, if you don't mind me backing up a little bit, what we're talking about on a freeze is that the mind needs to process incoming information.
Right.
And we as humans need to have information to process, because it's got to be processed for us to make a decision. You can't make a decision unless you've got enough relevant information to process. So the problem is that the information that's coming in is unfamiliar and it is threatening. And so unless you're used to, and that's not a normal thing. So it's new, it's unfamiliar, it's threatening. And so the brain doesn't know what to do with it because it hasn't seen it before. So if you go to these training, or even if you visualize, they always say, have a plan. If you go through in your mind, okay, if this happens and that happens, now your mind's already seen it. Your brain's already seen it. And it's not as new or unfamiliar or threatening. So you hear a joke, and the first time you hear it, it's funny. The second time you hear it, you snicker. The third time, you're like, all right, I'm done with this joke. That's how your mind works. So you see this scenario. I'm just making this up. Let's say your job puts you in a threatening driving situation, for example, and you go through it in your mind. You visualize yourself in this situation. The more times you look at it through your subconscious, the subconscious cannot differentiate between did it really happen and what am I looking at. So the more times you see it, you become inoculated to it, just like that that joke because, okay, it doesn't really impact you anymore. Now, that scenario is no longer new, no longer unfamiliar, and no longer threatening.
That's why, as cops, we always played the what if game.
Right.
Okay, I walk up on a car on a traffic stop and he does this. I'm going to do that. And you can never war game every single possible scenario, but like you said, it slows down that processing time because, oh, I've been here before. I've thought if he does this, I'm going to do this.
Mm-hmm.
And it really does make a difference.
Yes.
Practice is always better, but that's a very close second.
Yeah, I mean, you can sit on an airplane. We were talking about people who can shoot really well, and they have to have a certain type of weapon with a trigger press and blah blah blah. Well, there are also guys who can shoot a phone book.
Yeah, exactly.
And Rob Latham is one of those guys. And he's
I was just thinking of Rob. Yeah,
and he's as you know, he's the most decorated shooter that have ever walked the earth, and he is phenomenal. And I thoroughly enjoy training with him and working with him. And one of the things he told me is he goes to the World Shoot, and he's on airplanes a lot. And I said, well, Rob, what do you do for this? What do you do for that? He goes, well, I train. I go, well, wait a minute. How can you train on an airplane? They let you use your gun on an airplane? He goes, no. He goes, in my mind, I visualize. And he talks about how he comes out of the holster and he can feel the grip. And, he actually, because he knows his subconscious doesn't know the difference between actually doing it or visualizing it. And it's been proven time and time again that the visualization does increase the level of reps and the training.
And exactly, when I was thinking of him, I always have to laugh, and I hope if he hears this, he doesn't take this wrong, but he does everything wrong, at least according to like gun sight doctrine and the way I was trained and all that. But you can't argue with his his results. He is this incredible shooter, but it works for him. And I think he'd be the first one to tell you, just like you did, it's not the gun and all that stuff. Yeah, if you're at a certain level, having better equipment helps you. But when you're like the rest of us, the real humans, instead of buying the most expensive gun you can get, buy bullets. Buy bullets and invest in that time on the range.
And you got to get your training in, and and that's one of the things that obviously the guys who have the jobs that require you to have a higher skill have more training, because that's what differentiates you. Is the only way you're going to get that skill is in training.
So we started down this road already, and we took a very interesting fork. Some of your EP stuff, I'm sure there's some stories you can tell that really illustrate this whole concept of avoid the fight in the first place.
So I usually would work with a team, and we would this one incident we came up on, we rolled up, we got out of the vehicles, and there's a technique and procedure for every arrivals, departures,
very
vehicle.
scripted.
Yeah, it's extremely scripted, and it's done that way for a reason, because it's been proven. And I got another story I'll share later. But we came up on this one scenario, and we had a person who was already on the scene, the advanced person, and the advanced person had said, we gave us a hand signal, no go, because he saw something that was a potential threat. We immediately, no one said anything, no one questioned his judgment. We all turned around, got back in the vehicle, and continued on.
Yeah.
Because if it's a potential threat, it's a potential threat. So clear avoidance of a bad situation.
Yeah. And it's funny because my wife and I, we've been together about 12 years. And that was one of the first things I had to instruct with her is when we'd go walking or whatever. I said, first of all, stay on this side of me. So I have this side clear. And she understood that. And I said, and if I say we have to go or to go left or go right, just do it. And my beloved bride is not a shirking violet. She's definitely would be, why? And I explained to her, if I say do this or do that, just trust me and do it, because I don't have time to explain. And she finally, for her, that she got that I've picked up on something that is not a good thing, and we need to take some kind of action. Now I could say, and then I will go to my Master Blaster 5000 and lay down suppressive fire. My job is to get her off the X, and that's really the main job of executive protection.
Absolutely right. And for those who may be listening that are unfamiliar with that term, off the X, it's a protection term, and it originated. My little grandniece says to me, "Uncle Steve, you were alive in the 1900s?" Yeah. Well, yes, I was. Yes. And way back in the 1900s, in the early 1905, when they were doing the movies, they had the actor stand on two pieces of tape in the shape of an X, because that's where the sound was, the cameras, all that stuff was on the X. Well, that's the same thing in executive protection. That's where the bullets bullets are coming, the flamethrowers, the bad guys. Everybody's trying to get to that X. You need to get off that X and not just step off the X, because wherever you go, that's the new X.
Yeah.
So you have to have a plan, and that goes back to what you were saying. Even though it may not be, you may have plan A, B, and C in your head, it may end up being plan 27L, but
But at least you have the plan.
Exactly, and you have to have that ahead of the curve, because in those types of situations, are you ahead or behind the action-reaction power curve? You're behind. And so the only way you're going to get ahead is by taking these movements which place your opponent or opponents reacting to you. Now they're behind the power curve.
Yep. And it was funny. We were doing a radio interview the other day at a local radio station, and we kept talking about defensive handguns, defensive action. And the host, who, good guy, but he goes, what do you keep saying defensive? Because that's what we're doing. We are defending against somebody taking an action against us. If we go on the offense, now we're probably getting into the criminal world.
Right.
We're committing some kind of violence against somebody. Right. So everything we do is predicated on the idea we're already behind the power curve.
Correct.
That's where it's so critical to see bad things coming down the road.
It is, and that's the control of that power curve. And then what tool are you going to use? And it's like you may have, in law enforcement you get the bat belt with 90,000 tools,
yeah.
and then we in executive protection have multiple tools as well. And some of your tools are communication, awareness, your training to solve the problem with the lowest level of use of force, because that's a huge issue, especially today, is that you can't go out of the level of force required to solve that tactical problem.
So, Steve, we've talked a lot of generalities and concepts that are really important, but let's take it down to the individual level and some of the specific skills. When you're out on the street, just being Steve Tehrani, what are some of the things that are part of your, shall we say, kit?
Sure. You first of all always, I'm real big on this preparation thing. You always want to have your skill set up. All hard skills are perishable. And soft skills. You have to be able to. It's a quote from a Greek philosopher, Archilochus. I want to say 600 BC, and his quote was, "We do not rise to the occasion; we fall to the lowest level of our training."
Mm-hmm.
And that is parcel of if you're gonna put yourself in a situation that might get a little hairball, you best be up in your skills. Get to the range, get to the gym, whatever it is, keep your skill level up. So that'd be number one. And I put that as number one because that's the baseline, that's the foundation upon which this is all built. And then what's your environment? Do you need to be in a business suit? Are you in a pair of jeans? Pair of shorts? You're at the beach? What's your situation? That dictates your everyday carry. Basically, you're going to have to need some type of and this is at the very low level, minimally a tourniquet, some type of a med kit, either in the vehicle or on your person, because, with what's going on, you never know.
Yeah.
If you can't keep yourself, let's put it this way, injury is considered a tactical consideration.
Yeah.
Because if you get hurt and you can't protect those people you're with, then you're
a liability.
Yeah, you just went from an asset to a liability in 1 second.
Yep.
But if you can patch yourself up and stay in the fight and be cognizant of that injury. So, your training, your med kit, and then whatever it is you're going to take with you. In my case, specifically, I would take some type of folding knife, as a utility tool. Obviously your handgun, extra mag, those parts of your kit that are recommended for your daily carry.
What are some of the very simple indicators for folks that this is kind of a new concept to? We always laugh in law enforcement, our cop sense, our spidey sense, or whatever.
Right.
But that really is truly, a thing you have to learn and hone over time. But what are, on a very basic level, when people are moving about in their lives, what are some of the things they need to be looking at other people?
Okay, so if you take any environment, let's just take a convenience store. Mm-hmm. We all go to a convenience store. You walk towards the store. A good idea to look what's around you. Look at your perimeter. What's going on in front of the store? I mean, is there a holdup going on? Is one of the gas tanks on fire? Things like that. If something's going on before you even get there, you should be aware of what's, is there a firefight? Something like that. So be aware of it before you put yourself in it. Goes back to our avoidance thing. And then if it doesn't look right, feel right, sound right, smell right, it's probably not right.
Yes.
And you got to look at people in terms of, is that person supposed to be doing that? You know, like if somebody's going into a convenience store quickly, they want to get to their, cold drink or whatever it is. They open the door, they grab their drink, and they walk to the register. It's very purposeful. They're not milling around. They're not doing something that shouldn't be. It doesn't seem to fit that scenario.
Yeah. The guy loitering in the back, the classic, he's wearing a long trench coat and it's 105.
Right.
Something's not right about that. And it may just be the guy has a terrible fashion sense, but why test it and wait and see if he's going to do something? Because there's always another convenience store, gas station down the road.
Exactly.
I guess it goes back to people want to think the best of people or something. I don't know.
Sure. In our world, we use very similar. We use a concept called a event indicator versus a threat indicator. So an event indicator would be like, say, for example, you're in traffic and you see someone remove their foot from the brake and move it over to the gas pedal. That event tells you that the car is going to go faster.
Yeah.
So we see thousands of event indicators, people reaching for doorknobs, stuff like that. We see thousands of event indicators every day. However, if we see an event that gives us pause or causes interest, it could hurt us. And that's what a threat is. Anything that could potentially hurt you. So if you see something that gets your interest or raises your attention or really makes you focus, that's a threat indicator. You have to pay attention to that as opposed to an event indicator where you just let it go.
Yeah.
So I'd like to offer another tool on this awareness piece, and that's what we call setting your baseline. And let's use a coffee shop as an example. You walk into a coffee shop, and what do you expect to see there? Give me some examples. What do you expect to see?
People drinking coffee, picking up a cup of coffee, at the register, and maybe somebody on the laptop.
There you go. So that's what you would expect to see. So Brent just set his baseline. Now you walk into that same coffee shop with your baseline set, and you see some guy in there that's not on the phone, not drinking a cup of coffee, not on his computer, and he stares at the cash register and looks at the security camera and just stands there, not ordering. So that's what we would call something that is above the baseline.
Yeah.
That's there that shouldn't be there.
Yep.
Then another time you walk into the coffee shop and you're the only person. There's no one there. There's no one behind the counter, in front of the counter. You look through the aluminum doors. The place is completely empty. That should also give you pause because that's something that's not there that should be there. So you've set your baseline. And if you notice something either above that baseline or below the baseline, it could be a potential threat indicator.
That's a great way to put it. I had to laugh because when you said that, my statement would be the old Scooby-Doo, ruh-roh.
Yes.
Something is not right. And
yes.
I got to laugh because that happened all the time working midnights as a police officer. You go into the convenience store and there's nobody. Well, a lot of times they'll be sitting in the back. A lot of times, but or are they dead? Or is there somebody holding them hostage right behind the screen? Because all three of those scenarios had happened, and it's a very discomforting feeling. And my thought always was, well, we'll just either stay here by the door, stay just outside the door, or kind of work around to some place where at least I've got some smidgen of tactical advantage if one of those scenarios is taking place. But again, it didn't cost me anything. It was just a matter of, I'm not going to let it happen to me if there's any way possible.
Right. And that's what you're talking about. You had mentioned this earlier, having a plan.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't cost you anything. And so what? It ended up being nothing great, but you had a plan.
Exactly. So, Steve, what do you think? There's a big argument always of gamers versus defensive shooters.
Well, I get in this argument often, because I teach a lot of gun classes. And one of the arguments is, well, those gamers, they just, they don't know anything about tactics. They just know nothing about tactics.
That's a big argument.
Okay, great. You're standing there in front of a window or a doorway. That I understand.
Yeah.
And I'll give that to you as a tactical officer or a defensive tactics or a defensive shooter. I understand that. However, let's look at it. Your average defensive shooter, your average, I'm just talking about not the exception to the rule. Your average defensive shooter is not as technically skilled and the level of performance of your average gamer, so to speak. And I don't really even like that term, but
right.
I'll use it because I hear it a lot. And so imagine a world where you took the technical skill and the level of performance of a gamer and combined it with the tactical knowledge of a defensive shooter. would that not provide an advantage overall?
I suppose a great example of this would be me going against Rob Latham in an emergency. I'm a pretty good defensive shooter, but Rob, who's the ultimate gamer, he'd probably do better than I in that scenario.
Right. Well, here's another point that I'd like to bring up about when you look at the special operations community. Who do they hire to come in and teach at the higher levels is not fellow defensive shooters, but people who are at the Rob level, that are going to be able to teach these performance techniques. Okay, let's take your example. As good a shooter as you are, you're in an altercation where Rob comes from concealed at .68 and puts a round in your left eye at 25 yards.
Yeah.
In sub whatever, and it's like, that's you can't. There's nothing you can argue about that.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
It's because that type of person who has put that kind of time in, and I have seen both. Obviously, the special operations community are those guys. They have the guys who have that level of performance and the defense and the tactical, the defensive shooting tactical side.
Yeah.
And that's what makes them who they are, because they have that. And I have run into civilians who have the best of both worlds, and I admire them because it takes a lot of time. It's I remember I listened to this one golf announcer, and he said, "Man, how does he do that? And how is he so skilled?" And the guy turns to him and says, "Bob, it's just a lot of work."
How profound is that?
and I use that all the time because, well, how does he get that good? Well, guess what? He's out on the range today in Phoenix at 116, putting rounds down range, working on his trigger control.
Exactly.
That's how he gets that good.
And that's the thing that, again, I kind of go back to full circle. What I was saying was, especially now, what guns should we buy? I don't care. Buy something and buy a whole bunch of bullets and put in that time. And that's the only way it works, is put in time on the range under all kinds of conditions with good practice. That's part of it too. You got to practice the right way. Mm-hmm. But you have to make an investment, and it is an investment. It's an investment of time and money and your energy. Mm-hmm. And, as much as I've done, I've been blessed. I would call myself maybe an above average shooter even, but I always operate from the theory of I have only scratched the surface of what there is to know. And you and I were kind of doing some stuff earlier, and I've been to several classes, and I do try to practice some of it, but I'm not proficient. And seeing you do your stuff, it reminded me how non-proficient I am. And granted, you've reached a certain level, but there's folks out there that are pretty good, and they're on the dark side, And I always go back to, don't ever be in a knife fight.
Right. Yeah, no, and I like to emphasize your point about the training, and it is a combination of not only, yes, I fully agree, 100%, get to the range, but not only the range. There are times where you can't get to the range. Okay, let's say you can't get to the range, or it's too expensive to shoot 1,500 rounds a week. Especially now, you can't even find primers now.
Exactly.
Right? So you have the non-shooting skills, the gun handling, the mechanics. That can all be dry fire. I mean, how many times can you come out of your holster? How many rounds does that cost you? 0, right?
Exactly.
And you're working on your timing, synchronizing your grip with your press, etc. So there's lots to work on the non-shooting part of it.
Yeah. Great point. There's a device called a Mantis X, and it clips on the front, and that thing is fantastic. Yeah. I use it as my when I get writer's block. It's like, well, let's take the gun down, have a little safe dry fire practice, and it analyzes. But it's a great thing. And even if you can't train, at least going back to what you said, start thinking about these scenarios in your own life of, if this happens, I'm going to do this, and that's worth something. Mm-hmm. Well, Steve, I never want these to be softball interviews and just slow pitch you questions. I really enjoy this, but I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit.
Okay.
So you've got this incredible skill set, this incredible reputation, and you can back it up. Tell me about some times Steve Tehrani screwed up royally, because we do tend to learn more from our mistakes than we do from our successes.
Yeah, well, I'd like to preface that with an ancient adage that says, the master has failed more times than a novice has tried.
That's heavy.
So with that in mind,
Yeah.
yes, I mean, how can you possibly learn if you don't make mistakes?
Exactly.
And so, you try not to do that operationally.
You hope.
Make all your mistakes in training, and I have made plenty. I mean, who hasn't? And I try to learn from my mistakes. There are times where you make an error, and you're, because we're very similar in that we want to be perfectionists.
Sure.
But you can't. I take it personally when I miss a round. It's like, that is that's an affront of my personal being.
I have failed as a human being.
Yes, exactly. And I'm told time and time again, look, okay, did that bullet teach you anything?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, I guess it did. So then let it go. Make your mistakes, let it go, and don't dwell on it. And also don't dwell on your successes. One time we were in Rob was working with us on this off to the side, Rob Latham, and he goes, I'm not impressed by your successes. They mean nothing to me. They mean absolutely nothing to me. And then he turns around and says, and so don't your failures. So it's what you're doing at that moment, that specific shot at that time.
Yeah.
Don't get sucked into the vortex of, oh, I missed that last one, or wow, they did really good on that, because both of them are a thought that comes in that you can't process, because you can't reach that level of performance if it's on the conscious level.
Talk about what folks who are, because there's so many new gun owners, new shooters, we keep telling them, get training.
Right.
What are some of the criteria you would suggest they look for? Because there's a lot of folks that hang their shingle out.
Yes.
And they may be very experienced.
Yes.
But what do you advise your friends when they say, Steve, I'm new to this gun thing. What do I need to do to go get trained?
All right. Well, being in the industry for 37 years, I've seen, like you have, everything that you could see. And you have phenomenal operators that have been deployed 97 times. They come back, they can do it, but they are not trained instructors, and they can't teach what they can do.
Yeah.
So I have all the respect in the world, obviously, for our military and our law enforcement, but teaching is its own art.
Yes.
And then you see phenomenal teachers that really, haven't really done much. So there's really not a lot on the operational side there to, but if you can find a person that has been doing it for a while, they've been out there, I'm just making this up, maybe, 10 years is a good number. If this guy's been in business and that's what he's been doing for 10 years, then and he's still in business, it's probably a positive sign that, maybe knows what he's doing. And then you run into people who are, in my opinion, if you are an instructor, your greatest reward is seeing your student walk away with more knowledge than they came with. That's the reward I get, and you see some instructors who that's not what they want. So look at what's the end. What do you get in the end? That kind of thing.
That's a great point, because, I've said this many times to friends. I judge a teacher by their level of passion for teaching. I know, for example, I'll use Louis Arbuck, the great Louis Arbuck. If he could have paid his bills by just giving free classes, he would. The fact that he did it and got paid for it was just the best of both worlds. I put you in the same category, Steve, that it's truly a passion, like you said, to see your students walk away. And the greatest compliment to any instructor ever is when you get that after action report of, what you taught me, saved me. And that just is the best feeling.
And I got to tell you, when I get I get those letters, those emails, those texts, those phone calls. Hey man, I had this one guy, I don't even remember what he was. It was a military group, and I don't remember. It was about 15 plus years ago. And he goes, I was doing some stuff for the State Department. And he says, Mr. Tarani, you don't remember me. I was in such and such a class. He goes, but you taught us this one principle back then. And it happened to us about a month ago, and it saved myself and my team.
Wow.
And I thought, whoa,
that's heavy.
And, I obviously can't tell much about it, but this guy he remembered that from 15 years ago, and it saved his guys, and that made me feel like, man, I stood up straight and wore my
exactly. For a day, you think maybe I am pretty good here.
So that was great, and then I always get, as you do from the street, hey, I was in the situation. I'm so glad that you told me about this because it saved my butt, and like that student I told you about earlier who made the decision. He thought ahead. He goes, well, I could blast this guy, but I'd made the right decision, and I walked away without a scratch, and it doesn't cost me anything.
I've often said my greatest victories were when I didn't pull the trigger.
Absolutely. Sun Tzu, the greatest victories are those which battles that never happen.
Yeah. Exactly. Well, Steve, you do so much stuff across our industry. Tell me a little bit, or tell tell our listeners a little bit about how they can find out more about you and your various programs.
I have a very old website, stevetehrani.com. My books are on Amazon and places like that, and I do write for different companies and blog and things like that. So I'm around, and my website's probably the easiest way to get me. I do offer a newsletter that includes open source intelligence, which is non-classified. I'll say that again, non-classified information that comes to me that I believe is relevant to kind of what we were talking about, Brent and I were talking about earlier, which is see it, hear it, smell it coming. If there's an article or information out there that I believe may impact us as a society, I put it in that newsletter. There's no cost. It's just, name and email address.
Well, I have to admit, I didn't know that. I've learned something else here today, so I'm going to have to subscribe to your newsletter, and that's stevetehrani.com. Well, we're probably only up to 95 here on the mess deck at Gunsight Academy, but it's been fantastic talking to you, and we did did some video that hopefully we'll be seeing here before too long. But Steve, thank you for talking to us. It's always entertaining and enlightening.
Thank you, Brent. Anytime.
I appreciate Steve Tehrani taking time to talk with us, and hopefully you got something from this episode to make your life a little safer in today's crazy world. And with that, we hope you're enjoying the Guns Magazine podcast. Please tell all your friends, even those clueless anti-gun liberals who just bought a pistol last week. Guns Magazine is #1 in the business, and we're using our decades of friendships to bring you the most interesting chats in the gun world. If you've got questions, comments, or a guest you'd like to recommend for the show, please email me. That's editor@gunsmagazine.com. Make sure you don't miss out on anything by subscribing to us on your favorite podcast directory and YouTube. Of course, you can always listen and download our episodes at gunsmagazine.com. And while you're at it, don't forget to check out our sister publication, American Handgunner magazine, at americanhandgunner.com. Even better, it's not a bad idea to support firearms journalism by subscribing to one or both of our great print magazines. And finally, I'd like to remind you to check out our sponsor and friend, Kimber Firearms, at kimberamerica.com. That's it for this episode of the Guns Magazine podcast for the entire staff at FMG Publications. I'm Guns Magazine editor Brent Wheat. Now get out there and get shooting.